Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Freelancers Tea Break. And this time I'm joined by a wonderful guest, someone I've taken some of her courses and had some coaching from her through Voxer, which is Ruth Poundwhite. Welcome, Ruth. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Ruth, she's going to be talking today about a topic that I think a lot of you will really enjoy listening to, and it's about being quietly ambitious. So if you're an introvert, if you're highly sensitive, or if you are just quieter or don't really want to be out there in the limelight all the time, I think you're going to really get a lot out of this talk. So Ruth, do you want to kick off by telling us a little bit about you?
So I was literally just saying to you as I'm rubbish about introducing myself, but I will put it in the most succinct way possible. I am a business coach and mentor to who I call quietly ambitious humans, which we're going to talk about. I support people. Basically, I guess the long and short of it is I support people to really own who they are, what they want, and to build a business that honors all of it. So their own version of what a successful business looks like, not anybody else's.
You're also a recently published author as well.
Yes, I just recently published my book, Quietly Ambitious, and I actually have a podcast of the same name. I should have said that as well.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I forgot to mention
exciting. Yeah. So yeah, the book just came out. I don't know when this episode is going out, but it was available on ebook and it's soon to be in paperback and audiobook as well. Very exciting.
And I'll pop all the details below because I think if you enjoy this podcast, you're definitely going to enjoy Ruth's as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about your journey to being quietly ambitious and how you kind of came up with the concept of being quietly ambitious?
Yeah, so basically what I do now, being a business coach mentor, is it's not my first business. And I finished university in 2008, it was the time of the credit crunch, recession, and I had a degree in history and philosophy. So you can imagine that it didn't exactly lend itself to any specific career path. And I was like, what do I do? And I couldn't actually even get a job. Like I tried to get any job, like supermarkets, anything, and I just couldn't get a job. It was just that's the way it was right at that time. And I just went online. I was like, what could I do? And I found an ad for freelance writing. I think it was like a travel article. And I wrote it, got paid that day. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I could do this. I didn't really have any clue about the whole online business world. I just had I could write and I found I could make money from it. And it just took its own course. Like it wasn't an intentional way of starting a business, but that's how I started my copywriting business. Eventually, over the years, I built it up with a team into a proper business. It took me years to even call it a proper business, even though it was from day one, really. And the whole quietly ambitious thing, where that comes in, is basically, I guess because I was young, I was 21 when I first started it. And because I did it really unintentionally, I just fell into it. I just latched on to whoever I saw online, teaching you about building a business. I mean, my mind was blown that this was even a thing, and tried a lot of times to be different, to try and market the way I saw other people marketing, or try and say things in the way I saw other people doing. And this went on for years until I realized, maybe it's not me. I mean, I think I was like 4 years into my business when I read this book, Quiet by Susan Cain, which all the introverts, have usually read.
Yeah.
And it was just mind blowing. I didn't even know it was a thing to be an introvert. And although that's not the only kind of defining personality thing that I run my business around, it was a defining moment in the journey, because I just feel like all these things that you think are flaws, or that you're weird, or that you're different, actually, it's just the way I am. And I think that was the start of the journey to realizing I get to run my business, not just my business, but live my life in alignment with who I am, rather than always thinking I need to be different. And then, fast forward several years, knowing that I wanted to quit the copywriting business. I really wanted to help other people with their businesses. And I had gone on this journey of self-discovery and accepting, I guess, who I was, and then doing things differently. And eventually, I think I was doing some sort of journaling session. I was having a business meeting with myself, writing down ideas in my journal. I just came up with this phrase, quietly ambitious. And I was like, that's me, you know, because I think after discovering I was an introvert, I also had this idea that introverts weren't as driven or something like that. I don't know where I got that from. I'm sure that Susan Cain did not say that in her book. But it took me a few more years to realize, you know what, I can be an introvert and I can be quiet and I can not shout about my goals from the rooftops, but I can still have massive goals and be massively driven. So that's what I mean, like in a nutshell, about quietly ambitious. It was very helpful for me to own my ambition in that way. It really helped me to own how driven and ambitious I was in my way.
I think we kind of were touching on this before we hit record, actually, about what people define as introverts and extroverts and things like that. And I don't know about you, but I often get people saying, oh, but you're not an introvert because you're kind of out there or you're confident. And actually, that's the ADHD side of my brain. It's just very, very chatty. But I'm definitely an introvert who needs that time on my own to recharge. I can't be peopling too much.
Yeah.
I don't know what your experiences are of being an introvert, or what particular traits you found, things that you relate to as an introvert.
I mean, it always makes me laugh when someone describes me as loud. Like, I just can't believe it. And it's like, I think it's good though. It's good to, firstly, well, like you've given an example of being like a really chatty introvert, and a lot of people will assume that introverts aren't chatty, but it's totally not about whether you're chatty or not, really. It's about where you get your energy from. So you could be chatty. You can love chatting with people. You could love small talk. I mean, a lot of introverts don't. I don't love small talk, but
No.
you know, it doesn't mean that's not what it's about. It's about, well, do you need to recharge after you've been socializing? Or if you're an extrovert, do you need to recharge by socializing? And I know a lot of extroverts struggled in lockdown because they weren't getting their energy from the socializing. So it's really about that. And it's a different thing to be shy. And that's the thing. Like, I have been shy and I am still shy in some situations. And even acknowledging that it's not a universal thing, like it can change in different situations, was helpful for me. But I used to be very shy. But being shy isn't a trait of an introvert. It could be a trait of a person who's an introvert, but it's not part of the definition of being an introvert. So I think it's important that we firstly, well, we see people represented of all, like we're not, just because we identify with being an introvert doesn't mean we're all the same. Mm-hmm. We're all unique. We're like, you're the chatty ADHD introvert, and it's so important that like people see all of us represented, right? And I think, and on the flip side, like I work with, like I would say a large chunk of my clients are introverts, but I also work with a lot of extroverts or ambiverts. And actually, when I was writing the book, I did a little bit of research around it. And there is debate around how many people are truly introverted and truly extroverted. And I think actually a lot of people are a mixture of both. And that's where we get to all learn from each other as well. And like, there's parts of each way of doing things that's helpful for all of us. But yeah, there's a lot of extroverts who also happen to be highly sensitive. And again, highly sensitive, I think it's more common in introverts, but it's absolutely not exclusive. And I think the more we can open up and pick apart these definitions a bit, the better, because then we can really find our unique way of doing things and really honor our unique way of doing things. So in lots of ways, the labels have been so helpful for me, but they're also not as rigid as some people think. And that's really important to recognize as well.
Now, bear in mind that rigidity, the highly sensitive is actually, I don't feel like that's a term that a lot of people understand or know. So I wondered whether you could just explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so this is something I came across quite a lot later, but you know what? I should have written this down before we started talking. But there is a website, which we'll sort the link out for the show notes. But there's a website. It's a doctor. I think she's put together. I wish I could remember her name, but anyway, she's got a website like the highly sensitive person or something like that. There's a test you can do on there. And it's basically about how you react to different kinds of stimulation and how that affects you or not. And again, it really varies. Like, I have a lot of highly sensitive people in my world, and there are some ways that I'm not sensitive at all. Like, I'm totally fine with like violence in films and stuff like that. Like, that's always a trait that they list as highly sensitive. And I'm like, I'm fine with it. You know, I can handle that. But I'm really sensitive to smells. I'm really sensitive to like, a lot of thoughts and feelings going on in my brain, that kind of thing, you know. So it's how you react to different types of stimulation. So it could literally be like through your senses, but also it's mental and thoughts and feelings and stuff as well. So like recommend going and doing the test, because it's just eye-opening to see little quirks of yourself, like, you know, recognized and seen. But yeah, again, everyone is different, and it can apply to both introverts and extroverts. But I like talking about the sensitivity, because I feel that that is really where we have to be careful about the decisions we make in our business, to not like overload ourselves, and to really honor our sensitive natures, basically.
Yeah, and work out what's going to overstimulate you. And
Yeah.
even simply as something as simple as choosing a networking event and working out
Oh my goodness.
when you're going to be in your best kind of way of doing it, or whether you should stick to online because there's too many external stimulants and things like that, or sensitivities. Yeah, I can see how that can affect so many different areas of business.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you can make choices in all areas of your business that either support your personality, that stretch your comfort zone. Like there's a difference, I guess, between being safe and supported in your personality, but you can still stretch your comfort zone. And then there's decisions you can make that are just not right for you, that are just exhausting for you, that despite the fact that you see so many other people run a successful business doing these things, you don't need to do them, you know, and you don't need to beat yourself up about not being like them.
I think there's a few things that come to mind when you say that. So I think reels, for a lot of people, they feel like they should be doing it, but a lot of people are just very resistant to doing it. Lives came up a lot in my group actually when I asked about this as well. So a lot of those kind of visible things. What have you found works well, or maybe it's just from your personal experience, but what do you find works well for your personality type and being quietly ambitious to get yourself and your business out there?
I do think it is my personality type. Like if I was working with someone around this, we were having a conversation about the best way for them to put themselves out there, and if they were feeling overwhelmed or overloaded by all the choices, it would definitely come, I guess there's two things. For me, like I can't ignore the bigger picture of why I do what I do. Like that's so important. And I am an INFJ personality type, for anyone who's into the personality types, and that is a thing with the INFJs, like being really idealistic. And I do think that some people probably aren't as idealistic as me, and that's fine too. But for me, it's really important to know the bigger picture. Like, why do I do this? Why does this matter? Like, why do I want to help people in this way? Or it's not even about necessarily helping others. It's about, why do I want to live my life in this way? So it's very important that I do work that fulfills me, which is why I quit my copywriting business, because it was a successful business, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do forever. So there's that side of it. And there's also a bit of trial and error, I think, involved in figuring out what works for you. Because the fact of the matter is, we do hear more from confident extroverts just because they are more likely to be louder and talk about things more. So a lot of bringing it back to marketing and visibility, a lot of the stuff we hear is going to be from that point of view. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. When it becomes wrong is when people say that's the only way to do it. Yeah. Or when you make yourself wrong for not being able to conform to it. Like you think that you're less than. Like you're absolutely not. Like just because you can't do something the way someone else does not mean you're less valuable as a person. Like absolutely not. So I do think it requires trial and error. Like if, like me, you didn't even know what an intro was till you're 25 or whatever, then you're not going to know exactly what's best for you because you have never even considered it, right? So for me, yeah, if I was working through this for myself, was really a case of trying things and knowing that although certain things may be uncomfortable, I didn't actually know if they were right or wrong for me unless I tried it, right? Mm-hmm. There's some things that I would just never do, which was like, for me personally, going to in-person networking. Like I just wouldn't do that. But then again, like I said, I'm not just an introvert, but I'm also a bit like socially awkward. So that is why. But yeah, there's a fine line between figuring out, like deciding that something's plain wrong for you and not being willing to try and stretch your comfort zone. So I do encourage people to try things. I do encourage people to stretch. And I use myself as an example because I don't know how you felt about podcasting before you did it, but before I did it, I thought I'm not the right kind of person to have a podcast. I was like, why am I, who's a socially anxious person, doing something where I have to talk to people. Like, that's like my worst nightmare on one level. The reason I did it was absolutely not coming from a place of I must have a podcast because everyone does. It was coming from a place of I've got this nudge that I want to do a podcast and I don't really understand why I have this nudge given that I'm socially awkward. And then I realized actually having a podcast is perfect for introverts because there's no small talk. It's all deep questions. We get to dive right in. And it showed me that I firstly had a distorted picture in my mind of who should have a podcast, and secondly I was capable of so much more than I thought. So I always use that as an example. So I guess the long and short of it is trial and error, but also if you have got little nudges, like if there's a bigger picture of why you want to do something, if you're afraid, the fear alone I don't think is a reason not to do it. You got to try things. You don't have to try everything.
And you can always dip your toe as well in things like podcasting. If you want to try it, go be a guest on someone else's podcast, or be a blog post writing is perfect for introverts, I think, because I think like podcasting, you can edit, and that's really, really good if you like to really think through what you're putting out there and all that kind of side of things. Like you said, there's so many different ways of doing things. Just choose the ways that work best for you. But I love your point about not letting the fear stop you.
And it is trial and error sometimes. Like, I mean, I was literally talking to a client yesterday about visibility, and she was talking about, because she's an introvert as well, and she said it's not my nature to like just show up and share my day-to-day life on social media. And I said to her, you know what, it wasn't my nature to do that either. Like, I've always been very private. So there can be some resistance and some questioning, like, well, is that right for me if I'm just a private person? And I'm not saying that everyone needs to be on Instagram stories, but for me, when I did try it, it has become more natural for me. And I have learned to be more open. And actually, that's been a really lovely side effect. But it could also have been the case that, you know what, stories just really isn't my place to show up. But I wouldn't know unless I tried it. So, yeah.
So I asked in my group if they had any questions and things for you, and on the Instagram as well. And one of the questions, which I think is quite a common one, is how do you recharge your batteries after a period of intensive interactions? So that might be, I guess, a launch would probably be a big one for that. You having recently launched a book as well, but it could be any kind of thing, creating course content or anything like that. Do you have any tips for recharging your batteries?
So I just want to caveat by saying I still mess this up, okay? Like, I like sometimes I will push myself and not realize till I really need to hide away, like, oh, I went a bit too far. So it happens. And even after years, and even after teaching other people and helping other people, it still happens. But there are a couple of things. One side of it is literally the way I build my business so that I can be visible without always showing up. There are ways to be visible without always showing up. And the longer you're in business, the easier it gets because you've got more stuff to repurpose. When you've got a podcast and you record episodes ahead of time, or, you know, same could apply to like writing emails ahead of time, whatever, you've got ways of being visible when you're not actually showing up. Another thing that really helps me when I'm launching anything is to plan as much as possible in advance. Again, I'm not perfect and I sometimes leave it to the last minute, but the more I plan in advance, the more I schedule emails in advance, the less I actually need to show up during the most intense time of the launch. And launches always bring up feelings for people, so it is helpful for that reason as well. So being visible isn't always about being there at the time, but the other side of it is I have been, and I think it's an ongoing journey, just learning to follow my own ebbs and flows. I think that consistency is not about showing up all the time at the same time. Like, don't get me wrong, that is a valid strategy for the people who have the personality that it works for. Absolutely a valid strategy. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. But I'm not consistent. Like, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see me like be really chatty on stories, and then I'll just disappear for a couple of weeks. I will say it is easier to disappear for a couple of weeks when you've got more established and you have more of an audience, like it, because you've got momentum behind you already. But yeah, I think when you fall off the wagon, whether it's because you know that you need to, or you've just accidentally pushed yourself too hard, the thing to remember is just get back on when you feel ready. Like, allow yourself to have a break. And I think that the resistance of it is the hardest thing. Like, if we resist it, then we don't really allow ourselves to have the break. It takes longer to recharge. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's okay to hide away sometimes. If I've been really visible, I might then do stuff behind the scenes for a bit. So there's a visible period and then there's a behind the scenes kind of period,
Yeah.
Again, it is trial and error. But in terms of like actual, like I'm just thinking like this a bit like overall philosophy around it, but in terms of like actual tips and advice, I mean, the thing that comes most to my mind is I do like literally go and like lie down in my bed, I do stuff like that. Like it's a like, with the curtains closed or whatever,
Yeah.
If you need it, you need it. And I do other practical stuff. Like the way I manage my calendar for clients, I make sure that I don't have too many calls in any one day, or I try to do calls on specific days because I don't like to have them spread out all through the week, because I think other people will resonate with it's like it's just on your mind. Like if you've got it coming up right at the end of the day or right at the end of the week, it's on your mind all day or all week.
Yeah.
So little things like that. I charge higher prices so that I work with fewer clients. Like that's a big part of it that I always want to emphasize. And email marketing in terms of like showing up, being visible. Email marketing is like, I think, again, I never want to say all introverts should be doing email marketing, but at the same time I do think email marketing is probably one of the most introvert friendly things that you can be doing. And you can have sequences, you can have emails scheduled in advance. Being visible without actually being there is definitely the way to go.
I completely agree. Newsletters are probably the only thing I am always consistent with. And that is partly because I have my Jo who works in my business, and she does the actual action of taking the content I've created and putting it into ConvertKit. But yeah, newsletters are so introvert friendly, so easy to do, such a good way of connecting with people. And I honestly don't think people will notice if I go quiet on Instagram for like a month, especially my grid. But if I go quiet in their inbox for a month, I do think people are more likely to notice, which I think says a lot about email marketing in particular.
Yeah. There are loads of statistics about email. Like I wrote these in the book because there's a chapter on email marketing. When I was putting the book together, I actually even debated like, should I put a chapter in email marketing? And then actually it was like, of course, because it's the whole core of the way I show up as an introvert. But yeah, loads of statistics about how people actually prefer to be sold to in emails and social media. It's much more likely to be seen on email. Yeah, loads of stuff. And it's also like really scalable without taking any extra energy from you. But it's for me, it's all been about like setting the intention that the email marketing is the hub of the way I show up, and everything else feeds into the email. So I show up on Instagram stories and stuff, but ultimately, I mean, I don't always practice what I preach, but I try to invite people back regularly to the emails as well for that reason.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I have a feeling I think I know which one's going to be one of your top ones, but are there any habits you've built in? I have a feeling journaling is going to be quite high up in yours.
Oh God, yes.
So I don't know if tell us a bit more about how journaling has impacted your business, I guess, first.
I think the most impactful thing, certainly at first, was the self-awareness piece, because anyone who wants to build a business, or it's not even about want, it's like, literally, it's the only way it gets to be sustainable, to build a business around who you are and that honors your energy. But it has to start with awareness. And if you've spent so much of your life denying your sensitivity because your feelings were too much for example, your parents or your friends or whatever, or denying your introversion because the teacher always told you were too quiet at school, which is definitely the story of my childhood, then you don't even know who you are underneath that sometimes, because you've spent so long thinking, oh, I need to be different. So getting to know yourself is the first step. And journaling is very helpful for me in doing that. And I always have to add this really important rule, because when I first started journaling, around the time when I finished university, I was sometimes quite critical of myself in my journal. And when I look back at those old journal entries, it's quite hard to read. So the number one rule that I always want to give people is to write from your most kind, loving place. And as hard as it can feel to access that, journaling makes it easier to access, but it's not the place for criticizing yourself. And if you can, you will learn to do that less and less the more you do the journaling from that place. So yeah, understanding yourself, but it can be as simple as a quick 2-minute check-in. Like, how am I feeling today? What do I need today? This is the kind of stuff that so many of us are not used to. Introverts or extroverts, people in general, are not used to checking in with, because it's all about getting stuff done. Our culture is really focused around output and productivity, and actually checking in with your body, checking in with your mind and your feelings. Even if you did that 1 minute a day, you would learn so much about yourself, like really, really beneficial.
I think a lot of people think journaling has to be, I think bullet journaling has been a blessing and a curse, in that people think that they have to be really beautiful. And actually,
Yeah, I'm totally not into that.
No, and my journal, sometimes when I journal, it's a list of bullet points, or it's scribbles all over the page, or a mind map or something like that. It doesn't have to be like some beautiful, perfect page of notes. Sometimes
exactly,
it's just brain dumping.
I love those bullet journalers, but that's so not me, and it will put me off. It's like when you've got a new notebook and you're like, I don't want to write in it.
Oh, the first page.
It's so pretty. Yeah. So it's like you've got to let it be messy. You've got to like let it, like, and like you said, you sometimes write a mind map. I sometimes just write streams of rubbish, basically, but it's getting it out of my head, and that is always cathartic to me. So yeah, just do it the way that benefits you, and sometimes try a new thing, but you don't have to do it the way anyone else does it.
And do you have any other habits around that, or any other habits that you found really useful?
I would say, oh God, the number one thing that is coming to my mind right now is getting enough sleep. I know it's like so boring, but it's like, yeah, I have to. So it does surprise some people when I say this, but everyone has a different like mode that they find themselves in when they're like doubting themselves or whatever. My mode is doing more. So that's my default: overworking, pushing, proving. So I really have to rein that in and listen to my body's need to rest. That has been huge for me. And the thing is, going back to the introvert example, but you can apply this to however you identify as a personality. But yeah, going back to the introvert example, you might be, I'm thinking of an example. I went to see Denise Duffield-Thomas in a live event in London pre-pandemic. And it was a big deal for me, like going to a live business event like that. I don't really do that. I do it more now since then, but I hadn't really done it. And, shy, awkward, introverted, all those things. So it's a big deal, and it's going to be tiring. And when the event started, she was on stage and she said that she was a massive introvert. And she said, if there are any introverts here, just honor your need to not talk to anyone in the breaks. And that kind of blew my mind, because you can be at an event and think, well, it's kind of bad or rude if I don't talk to people in the break. So what I'm getting at here is you judge your need to rest, you judge your need to recharge. And it was great that she said that in the event. Like, firstly, taught me a good lesson really instantly and gave people permission. And also, she's an example of an introvert who's like rocking it in her business. But yeah, so I went for a walk on my own in the lunch break. And I had people there that would have been great to chat to, but I knew that I needed to recharge. So listening to your need to rest, but going beyond that and actually not judging it as like, I'm not good enough because I need to rest right now. So there's that as well. Yeah, listening to your body, listening to your need to rest, journaling, sleeping. I can't think of anything. I'm sure there's other stuff that I'm missing, but they're definitely the core things.
I completely agree on sleeping. If I ever go to a networking event, when I come back, I book 2 hours for a nap afterwards, because I'm just not, there's nothing I'm going to achieve after that.
What a great boundary.
But I think also, like you were saying about being an introvert, if you don't get enough sleep, if you're an extrovert, you're potentially then going to go spend some time with people and recharge off them. But if you're an introvert, that's just going to drain your resources. So you need that sleep more than an extrovert needs that sleep, possibly, because you need to keep that battery topped up for talking to other people throughout the day. So yeah, maybe it is worth thinking about your battery each day and how you can top it up.
Yeah, and if you've got something like you said, planning in the nap, like scheduling it in. I love that.
No shame in napping.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my final question was, if somebody is listening to this and they are thinking, oh, this sounds like me, what is one thing you would suggest that they do first, alongside obviously buying your book, because that's the best place for them to start? But what would be one thing you would suggest that they do?
Yeah, so definitely read the book, because it's like it's an overview of my whole journey, getting to grips with being quietly ambitious, owning my ambition, but in a way that honors all of who I am and my energy and everything. I think the one thing, if you resonate with the term quietly ambitious, is to make a point of really getting to know what it is that you really want in your life and business, because that was just so liberating for me. Once I realized, I'm an introvert and sensitive, and there's some ways I can't do things, but actually I'm massively ambitious as well.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't resonate with being massively ambitious. That's okay. Your level of ambition is just fine. But what I'm saying is, I bet there are ways that you have denied yourself even thinking about what it is that you want from life. Whether that's big, bold things like, I want to earn loads of money and I want to go traveling and I want to buy a big house, or whether it's like, I want to live in a certain way. I want to have time to just go for long walks or whatever. It could be anything. But I bet that if you resonate with the stuff we've been talking about, there are ways in which you've been denying yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a real journey of unlearning and deconditioning and getting to know yourself. But that is where I suggest you start. So how do you do that? I mean, there are various ways, but journaling, like we already discussed, working with a coach could be helpful. But also, I guess the most simplest thing you could do, maybe I'll ask a question now, do you have a nudge? Do you have an inkling? Do you have a little tingle at the thought of something and then you shut down the thought, or you immediately logically come up with a reason why you shouldn't be thinking this or you shouldn't do it? I would encourage you to see if you can hold that thought without shutting it down and to explore what that might look like. Because certainly there are things in my journey that I never even thought I could do, let alone would do. It's taught me so much about never assuming what's possible or not for me. So I think that would be the thing. See if you can notice one little area that you're denying yourself and seeing if you can allow yourself to explore it a bit more.
Actually, I think one thing I picked up from you, I had a Pinterest board of basically introverted women that inspire me, because I realized I was looking to a lot of people that I couldn't relate to. And actually, through doing one of your courses, I did end up creating that list. And once you start researching who's introverted as well, it's incredible. Even people like Oprah and people like that are introverted. And Denise Duffield Thomas, like you said, is a fantastic example. So I think that can help a little bit with reframing how you see it as well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, finding the right sources of inspiration. I think that matters a lot, actually. Yeah, I'm glad that you shared that.
So this is going to come out this week. So let us know where can we find you online, and do you have anything coming up that we should know about?
Oh, okay. So you can find my podcast in any podcast app, Quietly Ambitious. The book is available on Amazon. Even if you don't have a Kindle, you can still read the ebook using the Kindle app. It's also called Quietly Ambitious, the book. I tend to hang out most on Instagram, but like I said, sometimes I'll hide away, but I'm at Ruth Poundwhite on Instagram. And you can sign up to my newsletter. That is the place normally that I'm the most consistent. You can sign up at ruthpoundwhite.com/newsletter. And what do I have coming up? I mean, more plans with the book, paperback. Oh, actually, I've got a free challenge. I've got a free mini course coming out in July. So if you go to ruthpoundwhite.com/free course, it's called Success Without Sacrifice. And it's literally about getting to know yourself and designing your business around who you are. So that would be the place to dig more into this as well.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much for coming on. And I hope everyone really enjoyed that. I'll pop all the details in the show notes, and have a wonderful week, everybody.